are talking about it from
Yeah.
in her position.
Yeah. But it's
So,
acceptable because it's not a Republican that's saying it.
right.
That's the issue.
Yeah, it's insane. I'm going to, I should have hit that first, but I'm going to have to go there first. We're setting up on YouTube.
I
You
mean,
might
when you have MSNBC making some kind of comment like,
during the debate.
yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I forgot what it was with this attempt. Oh, that it's his fault basically.
right,
It's just kind of sickening.
right,
And I'm like,
exactly.
you're gonna meet your maker one day. You're gonna have to report on all of these things.
It's true. It's
It's the
true.
only
I'm
way
just
I
going to move
can
it over
cope.
here really quickly.
Yeah, it's
It's
the
my,
only way I can cope sometimes is to think about it like that.
hopefully that'll work. Okay, girl. Now live. I copied you to Facebook, hopefully. And then we'll start.
Sounds good.
Sorry if anybody's watching us right now. We are not quite started, but we're almost there. I'm going to share that, and I'm going to go one more place and share it there. If I can find it. There we go. Again, if anybody is watching us, please let us know how to add a timer so that I can do this without people knowing what I'm doing. That'd be so great. Thank
That would
you.
be lovely.
Yes, it's not giving it to me. I'm gonna try one more time. Copy Facebook. Moving. It will not let me put it on the page. That's fine. I'll put it on later. Okay. Closing. Okay. Second one. Hey everyone, welcome back to Be Not Afraid. Today, Christine and I are going to continue our conversation, our book club of The Queering of the American Child by Logan Lansing. The Queering of the American Child, the author is not religious. So this is not coming from a religious viewpoint. This is coming from, I would say, a classical liberal viewpoint, maybe not even any kind of viewpoint except for facts, as page after page, he has footnotes showing exactly the sources and where they're coming from. So as we see these sources, we know that this is true. These are facts. My friend Christine Stephen Wolk is a uh, I will let her explain it. Let's
A
explain
ther
herself. Sorry.
well, therapist and former professor of clinical psychology in the graduate program.
Yes,
That
and
is
so
very ideologically based.
and she was in the heart of this when they changed. She was a professor of psychology before it changed into the woke stuff, and then she got out of it pretty quickly because it eats your soul.
Yes, yes, because it eats your soul,
It
made it
eats your soul.
impossible to teach. Hmm.
Yes. So I'm going to share my screen now just so that you can see what we're doing in the book. So great. That's not great. Hang on just a second. I did this beforehand, so I don't know why it doesn't want to show it to me now. Well, Christine, talk about a little bit of what we're going to talk about while I do this.
Yes. So we're continuing on our discussion of Queering of the American Child. And really what we're doing is we're looking at the language that's being used. And that's really significant because the language itself has been hijacked and turned into something that sounds pretty on paper, but in reality is an ideological, activism type Marxist set of ideas. And this is so embedded, it's infiltrated our schools, it's infiltrated major institutions in general, including our government and the many arms of the government. And so it's important to understand the language and the use of language because that's what masks the damage that this ideology is actually doing to our children. And it starts as young as kindergarten, and all the way through 12, and of course all the way through college. But we're going to be focusing just on K through 12.
Right.
Um, yes. So, please bear with us as we're clearing up
Having
our
a little bit of technical
technical
difficulty.
issues. Yes.
Almost there.
But yes, but and I hope that, the listeners and you'll all, see that the difference between what actual diversity, equity, and inclusion is and what it is not, and what it
Right.
means to be truly inclusive and what it means to be inclusive only on their terms, they being the establishment that has put the wheels in motion for what we see now as the queering of the American child.
And now I finally have it up. I am so sorry about that.
No, yeah, perfect.
That was a bit on the crazy side. So
That's
we're starting
perfect.
in the middle of this chapter. We in my last one, actually in our last one we covered SEL, we covered Castle. So now we're starting about page 15 of what I've got copied here. So it says, can you read it, Kristen?
Oh, yeah. In June 2022, the AACAP pushed, wait, no, rushed to the defense of the Madison Metropolitan School District in Wisconsin. 14 parents sued the district in 2020, arguing that MMSC's guidance and policies to support transgender, non-binary, and gender expansive students violated their parental rights. The court battle was arduous and the case was ultimately dismissed, at which point the plaintiffs motioned for Wisconsin Supreme Court to review. The AACAP, I guess,
Yep.
jumped into the fray, submitting an amicus brief and informing the Wisconsin Supreme Court of the well-accepted psychiatric guidance related to the MMSD's policies. The AACAP's briefing was chock full of cult propaganda, including the argument that MMSD's secretive social transition policies can have, and then it's cut there,
Yep. Here we go. This one's
that I
hard.
cannot read. Well, can have
Can
a
have an
positive effect. You might be able to read it.
right. Can have a positive effect on students' future. So I'm going to go back just a little bit. I should have probably started here. So what happened is these parents were being told that their kids had to adopt these ideas. And the parents were saying, no, we don't want to just affirm. They're able to put things into our schools without us needing to, without us even being able to, as parents, to know what is going on. So for some reason, my being able to read this today is really, really tight. So for years, much of queer education, especially the queer consciousness raising methods found in queer pedagogy, has remained hidden under a veneer of cult slogans, cult words, and lies. Um, and what happened is that the schools of psychology decided that it was very important that our kids be affirmed And that was not the way of therapy back in the day, right?
Correct. Yes. Where exploratory therapy was much more, um, I don't want to say popular, but it was the method in which to practice under many orientations. So all therapists have the clinical orientation, but the ones who are standing, there's a couple of standing statutes in practicing, and one of them is exploratory, meaning that you do not necessarily affirm, you explore what the issues are and get to the bottom of them and the root of them and the core of them, rather than this affirmation that's actually very shallow based and um, affirms maybe skewed interpretations of the world of through the client's eyes, or
Right.
skewed interpretations of the client themselves through the client's eyes.
And so what we're discussing today is the why, because this is the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, or the AACAP.
Mhm.
And the thing is that when you hear names like that, you immediately think, oh, these guys are the experts. We need to trust them. But something happened because originally there were people who were standing up and saying, we don't like the direction. And when I mean people, I mean doctors standing up and saying, we don't like the direction that this is going. And they were shunned, put down, canceled, fired um, for daring to say that this does not align with the way therapy has always been. Okay.
And it's important to note that the psychiatric boards, the national psychiatric boards, are regulated and connected to the APA, which is the Psychologists Association, and they're also connected to the medical world, medical field. So it's an arm of medicine, right? So when
Right.
the medical field makes decisions that are umbrella-like decisions, all places like, or organizations like the psychiatric organization here, the board, must comply. So
Exactly.
coming from double ends, two ends.
Right. And so the ACLU got involved with this case, which was a case about how children are not safe if their parents know what's going on in schools. That's literally what this case was about.
Yes.
So the ACLU got involved and they responded that the dismissal brings a welcome conclusion to a protracted and arduous legal battle over the ability of Madison Metropolitan School District students to freely, and remember this word, my friends, safely, to freely and safely explore their identities on their own terms. We are glad that the trans and non-binary students will continue to have the ability to express themselves at school without fear of involuntarily being outed. This is what that case was about. So the ACLU, which many people think um, is a good thing. Many people think that it is still about our civil liberties, um, and it's not. It is it is ideologically captured, just like these other institutions.
Yeah, they've always been left of center, but now they're progressively left and radically left. That's really what
Right.
one of the issues is here.
Yes. So it says the ACLU statement is revealing and requires an examination to expose a wicked Mott and Bailey. So without fear of being involuntarily outed by staff. But what does that mean? It means that we're keeping secrets from parents and sending
Hmm.
children against, we're setting children against their families. And that is the end game here, is to put parents and their children at different points so that children have an autonomy that has nothing to do with their families and oftentimes destroys families. Um, because if you can destroy a child's relationship with their family, then um, they're more easily to control because they're still children. They're still looking for someone to help them and guide them.
Yeah, they
If
want a
you,
new family, and these activists provide a new family for them.
yes. And this says, in fact, what is being hidden is that the children are being groomed into the cult of queer theory and becoming socially and emotionally locked into supporting queer activism.
Yes.
So the goal is always activism. Um, that's hard to sit with. It's very, very heavy. I I don't know. Christine and I were talking before we started about just the heaviness of everything going on right now. And I get that this stuff is heavy. I also think that it's important that we know because even in our small town, this is relevant. So I do not know why the orange is so hard for me to read today. Um, can you read it?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay.
Developmental psychologists nationwide now push queer cult doctrines like the idea that all children are, quote, assigned a sex at birth, end quote, and have a, quote, gender identity, end quote, that must be affirmed. Parents be damned. These beliefs guide and shape their clinical practices and activism. The AACAP defends secretive, quote, gender affirming, end quote, school policies and practices because the AACAP has deemed the queer approach to child development as the only approach that is, quote, safe, end quote, and, quote, effective, end quote.
So talk to me about this, Christine. I mean, you've done a lot of stuff on critical therapy antidote about parents who have been told that they must affirm. What does that affirm look like?
The affirm, well, there's kind of two styles, I suppose, of therapy. One's affirming, and one is exploratory. And exploratory therapy is more about digging deeper to find answers or to find the root of the problem and the strain and the pressure and the feelings that these children are having, which are usually not related to gender at all. It just it's just that the gender identity theories are given to children as an answer to their problems, as a reason why they're feeling depressed and anxious, as a reason why they're unhappy and unsettled with their lives. So these children take it and run with it. Now, affirming therapy is the opposite of exploratory. It's affirming that, yes, indeed, your issue is gender identity because you, as a 12, 13, 14, 15, etc. year old, has said so, that you've said so. So therefore, that must be true. And therefore, that must be the reality. Completely dismissing what the reality is, which is that there's two sexes only. And that most of the time, these children have much more going on underneath that are actually the root cause of the problem. The other thing is that the therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc., mental health professionals have all assured parents that their child, when they threaten suicide, if they do not get gender affirming care and gender affirming surgery, that they will kill themselves. So parents have become frightened by these mental health professionals telling them that their child is, in actuality, suicidal, has a suicide ideation. So that manipulation, of course, makes parents panic and eventually they get on board, even if they weren't on board to begin with. That's happening in the therapy room between the therapist and the client, which is the kid. This discussion about what would actually make me feel better, what would lift my depression and anxiety. Oh, gee, it's the fact that, it's my gender. They've also erased the ideas of gay and lesbian through the trans movement, which means that one cannot be just a gay man. If you are attracted to men and you are a man, then that means you're actually a woman, and therefore you're actually transgender. So the gay and lesbian community in general is up in arms about all this as they see their own um, rights and movement having been erased little by little through transgender um, type uh, activities.
Well, it seems really reductive because I saw this graph that had if you're the most girly of girlies, then you're a Barbie, and you have a gender thing between Barbie and G.I. Joe. And
Mm,
anywhere else on that spectrum is, another part of the spectrum. So
yes,
instead of just saying, hey, some girls like to climb trees and do karate and whatever else, right? And some
yes,
boys are more gentle. Um, and oftentimes these kids grow out of it. I
that's
have a
the
really
other
hard
thing.
time calling these people experts,
Yes,
because it doesn't seem like they study much. It seems like it's more ideology, but that's my own opinion. Okay, so queer activists have long claimed that societal stigma causes the significant rates of depression, anxiety, and suicide observed in transgender, gender nonconforming, and non-binary youth. So they're claiming that this is why our kids commit suicide. But I'm
yes.
wondering why we had so much less suicide before all of this came to the forefront into our schools.
Social media plays a big role in depression and anxiety and elevated rates of that for a number of reasons. Also, the exposure to suicide, the exposure to depression and anxiety, and the witnessing of how kids are treated if they're, quote, depressed, leads to it becoming a trend of sorts and a way to be included in the group by being able to say, oh, I'm depressed too, I'm traumatized too. And that becomes okay because as you recall when we talked about social emotional learning, this whole idea of trauma, and that if you have this trauma, that sets you apart. And in order to be included and to feel as though you're getting the same amount of attention, you start finding things in your life that are quote unquote traumatic, even if they are not. It's the same thing with the gender situation. Um, when there's a solution, is to change my gender. I'll be less depressed. I'll be less anxious. I'll fit in. I'll be part of the group. That leads to a fantasy that is never going to come to fruition, which is changing my gender is going to change how I feel. That is not true.
Well, and I wonder because when I watch videos that are introducing um, transitioning to children or to young people, oftentimes they go straight into the social justice on the video, or they go straight into the you will be oppressed, people don't like you so much, so let us be your tribe type of things immediately.
Yes,
So when you're watching those videos and you're like, oh, part of my identity as a trans person or as a gay person or whatever it is, part of my identity is that people aren't going to like me.
yes,
Then I feel like that maybe can start the suggestion of
sure.
if people don't like me, maybe I deserve to not exist.
Yeah, I mean, there's more, suicide is more of an option now than it used to be. And because it's so publicized on social media and, being depressed is cool and, cutting self-harm is cool, there's a really big increase in the amount of kids that are, claiming that they've got depression, and maybe they do, but it's not because of their gender. But cutting becomes somewhat cool in its own kind of weird way. And suicide becomes an option to solve your problems, just as transgender does. So the more that this is sort of put out in the limelight, the more attention it gets, the bigger movement becomes, and the more kids that are going to be impacted and affected, and the more depression you're going to end up seeing. Um, so the increase, and I don't have statistics on this. This is my professional opinion from having worked with depressed kids and kids who have anxiety for many years. But what happens in that scenario is that suicide and cutting, self-harm, or changing gender become a part of it's on the table. It's on the table of options now, and that's the balance that we have to walk, the line we have to walk between educating kids about their own bodies, helping them understand it's normal to have anxiety as you're changing in puberty, and not affirm that they are indeed transgender. So we're walking this line here. In the meanwhile, the kids are potentially fighting back, but over time they won't. And over time it will change. And over time, as Carrie said, it will pass. And these kids will look at their mutilated bodies and have a much different opinion about what happened to them. And detransitioning does not bring back every single function of genitalia or reproductive organs.
Well, and it also doesn't bring back the bond between parent and child.
Correct.
Um,
You can re
organization, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead. Let's move on. Go ahead.
Okay. Organizations like the AACAP and the American Psychological Association, the APA, informed, read, bullied by relentless queer activism have adopted the same arguments. So what happens here is that people do what they are told to do because of fear, because they're afraid of being canceled, because, and believe me, it's true, because they get death
Yes.
threats, because all sorts of things happen to them. They are shunned. All of these things happen. And so then our most trusted professionals stick their heads in the sand, and a lot of them don't believe it. And they go with it anyways because they don't want to be the one in the witch hunt.
Yes.
For more than a
Yes.
decade. Oh, go ahead. Go
No, I
ahead.
was just going to say the licensing boards and the regulating boards being captured is the worst possible thing that could happen to these professionals. It's the absolute worst, because
Yes.
that is where you can get reprimanded and potentially lose your license.
Right. So everything that you've given up, I mean, I think to be in the medical, it's like it's much more college than anywhere else. I think it's like 6 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 6 years and so much to
8, I
in
think. Yeah.
eight, oh, okay, 8 years
Yeah.
to invest in and to have it all taken away because you dare to stand on principle. Very few people are willing to do that.
Yes.
So, for more than a decade, the AACAP and the APA have worked to transition away from traditional models and theories of child development and towards queer development psychology. For over 10 years, our experts have been moving into queer theory, queer ideology instead of proven practices.
Yes.
Um, then it says the major shift from classifying sex confusion, which is what they used to call it. You were confused about your gender, um, as a psychological abnormality that should be taken seriously and treated accordingly, to classifying gender dysphoria. That's what it used to be called, gender dysphoria, as a path to open exploration. And that's what she was talking about, explorative therapy, of a child's gender with no goal in sight, happened in, does that say 2019?
Or 13.
Oh, it might say 2013. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
So,
13 that it was updated, the DSM, I believe.
okay. So the APA's diagnostic, and that's another one, I think it says statistical,
Yes.
manual of mental disorders. And there it is, the DSM-5. Um,
Yes.
and this is when they updated it from gender identity disorder with gender dysphoria.
Yes.
So can you read that next piece? Because we're right on
Yes. The previous versions of the DSM, a gender identity disorder diagnosis, was considered a mental health disorder. The disorder was located in identity itself, meaning the clinicians should treat a person who identifies with a sex other than their sex in a way that helps them overcome that identity crisis. So you're having, these young people that are starting to develop a sense of identity and a sense of healthy separation from parents, but still a healthy attachment to them at the same time. That all of these changes that are happening, and this identity crisis that they may be experiencing, let's just say even situational crises. My parents are getting a divorce and it's devastating, for example, then becomes, okay, well, you know, the answer to this is, especially if you're feeling uncomfortable in your body, you're feeling uncomfortable in the way that people see you, you're feeling, as though if you were a boy, your parents would love you more. These kinds of ideas start slipping in to the room, and you have the therapist affirming them. And that, in and of itself, is supposed to then resolve the identity crisis. And we know from detransitioners that that is not the case. It actually worsens, the crisis over time.
So when they're, yeah. Okay. So the DSM-5 doesn't care about identities crises that people with confusion experience. It only cares about resolving the distress. So it's the quick fix.
Yes,
It's also a very lucrative quick fix.
yes. There's a
It's
lot
life,
of money to be made. Mm-hmm.
yeah, lifetime medication, but it's a quick fix for distress. We are being taught that to be uncomfortable is harm,
Yes,
and our kids are being taught that. So to be
yes,
uncomfortable at all, to not have things go exactly the way that you want them to is harm. And you shouldn't have to deal with that because that traumatizes you. So here, let us put you on this track to alter your life.
yes.
Okay. Um, Next one. That's another one I can't see because of where it's
Okay.
placed.
No problem. The DSM-5 updates undeniably reflected 2 decades of queer activism in psychology. That activism started really paying off in the late 2000s as the APA's 2008 declaration, APA, uh, resolve, re,
Yep,
re,
resolves to play.
resolves to play. Okay. Leading role in improving treatment for gender variant people demonstrate for gender variant that the people demonstrate. The
We need to look at
declaration,
2008, people.
yes, yes,
In 2008, a lot of things changed in our country. We were very, very busy praising the fact that we were electing someone into office that we'd never elected before. But these were what was happening behind the scenes.
that
And
is such a brilliant point, Carrie. I don't think you can overstate it. You can't overstate it enough. We have been distracted by all of these other things, by the fact that yes, we have a president that's, Black for the very first time. Yes, now we've got all of these other kinds of things that keep us distracted. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, they're creating a crisis of gargantuan proportions that's going to affect decades worth of children and parents and childhood development. And the people that say we're turning a corner, that may be the case in some places, but California just passed a law where you can actually get gender reassignment surgery without parental consent at the age of 12 and up. So I don't know about turning a corner just quite yet. I don't think we're there.
yeah, exactly. Um, so they resolved to play a leading role in improving the treatment for gender variant people. They adopted a resolution to support legal and social recognition. So they did this to support legal and social recognition. That sounds kind of innocuous, but social recognition means that everyone else must play into this. That's what it means, is that if we don't fight back, we have to play into the delusion That is something I personally am not willing to do, not because I'm full of hatred, but because these young people need to know that there's somebody out there that will tell them the truth when they get on the other side, which the numbers are growing and growing and growing of young people who are coming to the other side. Um, sorry, finish that one. No. Okay. Oh, okay. Beneath all of this is the DSM-5 facilitated a tectonic shift in children's developmental psychology. No longer are children considered abnormal or off track, because that could be offensive, for thinking that they were born in the wrong body. Instead, psychologists work tirelessly to affirm a child's feelings. So instead of taking the responsibility of raising children to be contributing members of society, we're bending over backwards to make sure that children feel no discomfort whatsoever, while bringing on a whole lot of discomfort into their lives. So this one is hard because they literally do not believe in childhood innocence. So beneath all of this, and as a final impediment to queer theory, is developmental psychology, particularly childhood developmental psychology, the way in which what your child should know. All of the books that we've read on how to make sure that your child is healthy and growing and prospering, the way that we would hope they would, is now null and void. So this field has long been recognized that growing up in a developmental process containing certain milestones and takes place within boundaries usually defined as age appropriate. Sex, sexuality, and even romantic or many emotionally involved relationships are not developmentally appropriate for children and can do lasting psychological damage if introduced irresponsibly. Learning to categorize the world at first as concretely. So what they're saying is that we used to teach there are certain facts in the world. We protecting our kids and helping them learn those basic facts was a priority. Now, because we put I'm getting emotional here, but now as we put a phone or device in our children's faces, we say, well, they've seen it on their phone, so it's our responsibility to address it more deeply. So now who defines what age appropriate is? Because it could be anything that your child has seen. If they've seen it, well, then it's age appropriate for them.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Queer theory colonized and captured developmental psychology by attacking the notion of normal or the innocent child.
Yeah, there's a real
Go ahead.
move in psychology, a real push toward taking out words like abnormal or pathological. And that becomes problematic because it provides absolute when anything goes and any behavior goes and it's everything and anything and there are no guardrails to society, we don't have a
We
boundary
need to slow down on the
life.
anything.
Yes, we need to
Anything.
we need to slow down on that. That's exactly right. And when you don't teach a child the difference between something that is normal and something that is not normal, then the child has no vantage point for what those guardrails mean and for what it means to be a contributing member of society. That child is going to struggle because there are no boundaries at that point. Anything goes. And as you said, Carrie, anything is a problem. So these kids are growing up believing that there is no such thing as abnormal or pathological. Therefore, they're not treated mental health related provided mental health treatment. in a way that actually resolves or addresses an issue. Instead, they're told they're right. They're told that it is the world is how exactly how they see it, and the way they feel is, the exact right, thing to respond to. And, we can fix this problem that you're having.
So basically, it's like they've taken mental health and the whole need to see a therapist and said there's no such thing as mental health because nothing is wrong.
Correct. Correct.
So there's no better paper to turn to than Hannah Dryer's Queer Futurity. Please write that down if you're watching later. Queer Futurity and Childhood Innocence. Beyond the the injury of development. Beyond the injury of development. These people believe that when we raise their children, quote unquote, correctly, that we are injuring them and that it is their job to save them.
It's very, very dangerous that children are not being taught how to be uncomfortable or how to sit with difficult feelings without making drastic moves to eliminate that particular feeling. I mean, that's part of growing up, and part of growing into a fully functioning adult is learning that there are going to be things that are just not going to work out, things that are going to be unfair, things that are going to be, uncomfortable and difficult, rather than trying to fix it so that we can get rid of the feeling. We're not teaching them how to cope with it and to learn that that's part of the process of being human and the basic development of the human brain and the human experience.
Right. We're also opening up the door for all sorts of abuse.
Yes,
These people don't believe in abuse.
yes,
They these people will talk about boy lovers, etc.
yes, yes,
They don't believe in abuse. And when one person cannot consent, that does become abuse.
yes.
Um, can you read around? I can't
Oh
read
yeah,
that.
growing up normal and safeguarded by developmental appropriateness. These are the safeguards I was talking about earlier, the guardrails, the boundaries and containment. Without those, as outlined, um, in rigorous child development psychology, it's characterized as a kind of injury to the child. So essentially, boundaries are injuries to the children. In brief, believing in age appropriate approaches backed through child developmental psychology allegedly injures kids who might otherwise have grown up to be queer activists. Remember, that's the ultimate goal. It always comes back to queer activism by exposing them to normal childhood that threatens to straighten them against their best interests, with straighten being in quotes. They mean straight as in sexual orientation, and they mean straight as in well, I think mostly sexual orientation is what they're referring to here.
They do, but they also mean it in terms of capitalism. They mean in terms of keeping society, of keeping any sort of a norm. That's what they mean
Yes, yes,
by the
yes,
straight.
yes.
So when I think of this, I think of having a little baby who, pre-toddler who can crawl around and walking outside and just going, "Oh, little baby, I want you to see the world," and just letting your baby go for a crawl. Open up the fences and just let your baby go. Just let them
Yes.
crawl. Let them, how far can they go? Okay,
Terrifying.
that's really what this is like. Like you've got to give your children, and we do see. We were talking about that on on the Radical Center, but we do see where they're saying that to be a good parent, to be a responsible parent, is to be inequitable, literally. And
Hmm.
that comes right down to this whole thing. But if we can take away certain things from our children, believing in age appropriate approaches back through child development, if we believe in that, then we're somehow overprivileging our children.
Yes.
We need people to wake up. Parents, you've got to
Yes.
wake up. I've seen many parents say, well, as long as they're not pushing my child, as long as they're not going to get in trouble if they don't, whatever. But we're still exposing them to this stuff um
And
in our
they're
schools.
very, yeah, and
Yeah,
they're very impressionable at this age. And the opinions of their peers tend to matter more than the opinions of their parents,
right,
which is
right.
very scary.
So queer theory tasks developmental psychology or takes developmental psychology to task for their catastrophic support for beliefs that childhood queering is not viable or healthy. Just let your child crawl down the road because if you don't, you're not giving
Mm,
your child a healthy, open-minded experience.
yes.
Okay. Let's go with the second one. That is gender identity disorder. I can't read it. It's one of those, I keep having this thing block me.
That is gender identity disorder was a way to fix, as we've been talking about, here it is, as a way to fix children rather than allow them to be who they really are. And allowing children to be who they really are requires ditching the old paradigm in favor of embracing children's queer curiosity and patterns of growth. Queer developmental psychology must address the child as already queer. So that's a given that the child is queer. Walking through the doors of the therapist's office, it's a given under this type of practice.
But we're not only talking walking through the doors, we're not talking kids who would be deemed to have a problem. This is every child. The
Every
queer
single
activist,
child,
a
yes,
child assumes that every single child is queer. They just haven't figured it out yet.
yes,
It's why groups like GSA changed from Gay Straight Alliance to the Gender and Sexualities Club or Alliance, because the goal is to find as many possible people as possible and to help introduce them into their quote unquote queerness.
yes,
So, queer theory claims that the soul is the prison of the body. The society convinces children's souls to materialize certain futures onto their bodies. That is, queer theory argues that disciplines like psychology serve to discipline kids into stepping out of line, or kids that are stepping out of line. So psychology is a discipline, helping kids, fixing them, helping them find their way to quote unquote normal is wrong to these people. You can agree with that or not, but that's that's what these people believe.
hmm
Um, and I think it's so interesting that that they're constantly talking about colonization when it's exactly what they're doing.
yes,
So, okay, this one was interesting, and it gets better approach, treats a child's um like disorder or disorders that they can be addressed. So they don't agree with an it gets better approach. They think,
yes.
go ahead, keep going.
Which, yes, and which we know that most about most children that present with depression have depression over situational matters, not an actual underlying mental health disorder. So that means that it will get better. These are circumstantial situations that they tend to be the most depressed about that do improve in time. And we know that over 90% of children um, who die by suicide have killed themselves over situational matters and circumstances that will change. That's 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. Okay. Rather than an underlying mental health disorder that, is fueling this.
Right. And that with the right support and the right mentors, they can get through and get to the other side.
Yes. And it will get better. Mhm.
We have catastrophized so much for our children. We've
Oh,
told them
yes.
that everything is so very, very extreme that there's no way to make it through to the other side.
Yes.
So here it says, queer activists think that telling kids it gets better only stabilizes a definable future within a current um, something
Socio-political.
sorry, socio-political order. I can read, I just can't see it.
Yeah,
Uh,
same here.
it gets better, postpones feelings of the, and this is their term, mythical adulthood. And we wonder why we have so many people who are failure to launch,
Yes. Yes.
which is that's a whole nother episode.
Yes.
Um, but they tell our children that becoming an adult is mythical, that there's nothing, they're never going to be able to afford a house. They're never going to be able to do these things, marriage is patriarchal, et cetera, et cetera. So our children are being taught that adulthood is mythical, requiring children to tolerate the intolerable, oppressive social fabric they are drowning in. And we wonder why our kids suffer of depression when this is the rhetoric they're hearing. To live life, to exist, to grow and to mature is to drown.
Yes.
Um, Queer activists believe that childhood innocence is a political construct that normal people use to keep children from learning about their queer sexual desire.
I just can't.
It's
Sorry.
heavy.
I I just I
Yeah,
mean it's just it's laughable. I mean,
it's, I mean, I wish it were laughable.
yeah,
But
I
it's
know.
true.
I
I've
know.
I've literally sat next to two therapists in a restaurant, and one said, uh, I mean, childhood innocence, if you believe in that.
Mm,
And I was
mm,
just like, holy cow, I can't believe
mm,
I'm listening to this
mm,
conversation, right?
mm-hmm,
But I
mm-hmm.
was. The queer cult does not believe that children are innocent. Queer activists believe children are full of queer sexuality and um claiming
I,
that society just opposes. Is that what it says? I don't know.
desire,
Or queer sexuality and desire.
claiming that society just suppresses
So
and restricts.
I don't know if I sent that to you, but there's a video from this group called they're on YouTube, and it's from Planned Parenthood, but it teaches kids about sexuality. And in the cartoon, it has a fifth grader who is
Yes,
pleasuring himself, right? And his mom knocks
yes,
on the door, and he goes, I'm coming. And you're just like, seriously? For fifth graders?
yes,
Really?
yes, yes.
Um, but they think that that is good and helpful, and I know a lot of children, and this is not a part of their lives. Children who are, I mean, this thing was called how many times, I'm just going to say it, how many times can you masturbate in a day?
Yes.
That's what it was called. And um, children who have not been sexually abused are not constantly thinking about sex.
Mm-hmm.
Teenagers, as they get a little older, maybe, but I've got a teenager and I'm not going to go into his life, but I don't think that's part of it from what
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Um, but I don't think that fifth graders, this is the main thing on their mind. If it is, then your child might have been exposed to something beyond their years.
Mm-hmm.
So, in this view, all children are capable. I can't see it. Okay.
Um,
In this view, all children are capable.
uh,
They're they're anyways, they're capable of true human agency.
yes.
Um, as someone like Paulo Freire, remember the guy who guides education, would define as queer activists like Dyer claim that making childhood sexuality taboo hurts children. Queer activists say that to not expose our kids to sex in very, very graphic ways, I should make it really clear I'm not a prude by a long shot, but I still believe that we need to protect children.
Yes. Yes.
So, um, queer activities like Dryer claim that making childhood sexuality taboo hurts children and their creativity and imagination. Safe and welcoming schools, my friends. This is safe and
Mm,
welcoming schools. Um,
that's right. And then children are over sexualized at certain ages, and that disrupts
yes,
the development of their brain, which continues to develop until the age of 25 or so.
yeah. So they want our children. Um, they think that if our children are heterosexual, that's because we've oppressed them into it. That's what it means. So remember, when you keep your mouth shut, it's not about empathy. It's not about having kind children. It's about finding as many children as possible and bringing them into this ideology. Defining children as innocent prevents all children from being exposed to queer forms of sexuality and desire before their future is settled. Now, at the beginning, Christine said that this is kindergarten through 12th grade, but it's
Hmm.
not. Most children developmentally know that they're boys or girls before they enter school,
Hmm.
which is why we've got babies crawling around the floor with dry cleans
Hmm.
because they want the innocent child gone before they get into school. They want that kindergartner raising their hand and saying, I don't think there is such things as boys or girls, because
Hmm.
then it starts a conversation for the rest of the kids in the classroom.
Hmm.
Okay, queer
Or
activists. Oh, go ahead.
my good friend whose 5-year-old came home and said, "Mommy, am I a girl or a boy? They teach me in school that I can choose." Yeah, North Carolina.
Wow.
Yeah.
We think that we move to these places that they talk
Hmm.
with a southern drawl. We're
Hmm.
we're covered, but we're not.
No,
There's no place that this hasn't reached.
that's right. That's right. It's saturated. Hmm.
Yeah.
I think Florida might be one of the only states. I want to say Florida and I want to say Alabama or Arkansas are the only states that have removed all of this from the curriculum. Their Department of Education in those states have removed this from their education, their academics. Those are the only states that have done it so far. We have 47 more states to go.
Well, and the tricky thing about it is that like I used to teach sexual abuse prevention to kids.
Mm,
And we had to be so careful. We were trained by the police. We had to be careful about the things that we taught so that we did not sow seeds of this stuff into their minds.
hmm.
And we switched that. You could not do worse for our children without planning it. That's the issue, is that this
That's
stuff,
right.
this destruction is planned.
That's right.
So queer activists consider childhood an arguable crucible or ground zero of all sexual politics. They believe children are pawns that normal people use to protect their dominant interests. In this view, who gets to decide what a child, childhood, or innocence means determines the future of society. So you have to recognize that we live in a time where we are being dominated, we are being colonized, and our children are really on the front of that line. So when they say that they see our children as pawns, well, I'm sure they do, but they're their pawns because
Yes.
they're the ones who are shoving this down their throats. Um, so let's see. Normal people get to, if quote unquote normal people get to define these concepts, then the future will be normal. Heaven forbid. If queer activists get to define these concepts, then the future will be queer. And at least one school in Utah has signs, posters on the walls that say the future is queer. Yeah,
My gosh.
it's awesome.
Oh my
And by
gosh.
that, I mean the opposite.
Yes.
So here's the thing. Developmental psychology was the great wall that prevented queer activists from presenting, discussing, and encouraging developmental inappropriate ideas, concepts, and themes with kids. They changed it. They took over it. So spend some time getting on some pages and watching what some counselors, especially school counselors, say. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I think it's important because, we've used the word abuse. I've used the word abuse, that this is abusive, actually, this type of education. And I think that's important to note that here, even in the book, it says 20 years ago, it would have been considered child abuse to discuss sexuality and desire with little kids. Likewise, affirming a child's mental health disorder would have been considered psychologically abusive. That is so important because it is abuse. It's a form of it is a form of abuse, whether it's mental, emotional abuse, sexual abuse. It's a form of abuse. So I don't use that term flippantly or lightly when I've said,
Right.
many times that it's abusive. And here we are in black and white, uh, reading about this, that it is in fact abusive.
Well, it's so interesting. When I was training to be a foster parent, um, all of this stuff would be like if you were anywhere near any of this stuff, you would never get your license.
Yes,
Never.
yes,
Now, if you don't embrace it, you won't get your license.
yes, yes,
So you are taking kids who are coming from the most traumatized experiences and you're bringing them into situations. Well, guess what? I've seen little kids do things to other little kids. Um,
yes,
and when we normalize that, you can do whatever you want to try to force this down the throats, but families know, and families are going to avoid those kids who it's normal for them to sexually assault other little kids. They're going to keep their kids away from them. And I don't blame them for doing so.
sure.
But now we're normalizing it. So we're normalizing predatory behavior, but we're also normalizing to these kids that bad thing that happened to you, well, it wasn't so bad. And so if somebody else wants to do it to you as well and you like it, then that's fine.
Yes.
This is this is the heaviest stuff I think we cover in all of everything. This is way heavier than the race stuff.
Yes.
Um, okay. So developmental psychology is what gave what was appropriate. That's why we had all the self-help books. That's why we bettered ourselves.
And they were the gate that blocked the queer activists. Now they are no longer the gate. They actually opened the door. They destroyed the gate. That's why when I talk about mental health being at the core of some of this and mental health being responsible at the core of this, these are the reasons why, what we're reading today about psychology and how, the development of these queer activists are coming directly from psychological concepts that have been manipulated and distorted and
Twisted.
skewed
You could
and
even say queered.
twisted,
Queered.
queered,
Like
queered,
that's what
straight
they
up,
do.
straight up.
Okay. So Just to recap, queer activists think that they are the only ones capable of answering questions related to sex, gender, and sexuality. So, there will be people like there always are when I make these videos who try to turn them into social media and say this shouldn't be allowed, this harms this harms us and our very existence, et cetera, et cetera. And some people believe that they're the only ones who should be listened to.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, as somebody who experienced child sexual abuse, I think I've got a valid point here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to keep going. Queer theory uses queer pedagogy to coerce children to bite the apple, to learn the secrets of queer sex, sexuality, and desire. Once your child is introduced to sex, there is no going back. As
Mm-hmm.
somebody has said, we're not going back. This is what going forward looks like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Queer pedagogy exists to take innocent children and initiate them into the revealed knowledge of the queer cult. A parent can't take their child to a developmental psychologist to address sex and gender confusion because the psychologist serves only to affirm the initiation. Now, can you clarify that? Because I know that there are definitely therapists who don't. There are
Yeah,
therapists, yeah.
there are therapists who don't that, that use exploratory therapy and, believe that the core of the issue typically actually lies with what's happening at home. That's actually one of the biggest or most common reasons that children go to therapy. The parents or the structure at home is not structured properly. There are things that are happening, usually within the home, that cause kids distress. It's not usually what's happening at, when they go to school or in class or whatever. So child therapy always included the parents or the caregivers because it was treated more like a unit, a family unit, than it is today. Now they're separating the children from their parents rather than trying to rejoin children with their parents and reestablish attachment connections. They're seeking to destroy those by siding with the child and taking a side saying, yes, I'm going to affirm this because if you say so, then it must be true. And the parents become the kind of the devil in the story, unless they go along with the affirmation as well. That's not all psychologists or therapists. There are some that still practice exploratory therapy and understand that parents need to be involved and understand that um, exploring is much more valuable and safe and healthy than affirming. But you have to kind of look for key words when you're looking for a therapist to see what they believe, because the problem is they're turning out therapists that are learning all of this stuff in school, writing papers, doing research, taking tests. And that in and of itself is indoctrinating and normalizing for the student all of these concepts that they then bring into practice.
We just voted to bring in a whole bunch of new therapists. I call it conveyor belt therapy. They're being fast tracked and
Yeah.
put into our schools.
Yeah.
And my opinion is that the majority of them, and I'm saying this from different points of view. I'm saying this from talking to people like you, but I'm also saying this from talking to current students.
Mm-hmm.
They are sending their work and going, what the heck is this? And then by the end of their 2 years in their program, because it's fast tracked, then by the end of that, they believe it.
Yes.
So we're activists following Eve Kavinsky Sedgwick's seminal work, Epistemology of the Closet, fundamentally believes that innocence or initiation is a binary that must be overcome. Your child's innocence must be overcome. Um, like the binary of appropriate versus inappropriate and man versus woman, innocence versus initiation must be dissolved, revealing a new, higher truth, namely that innocence is a social construct normal people use to initiate children into cis heterosexuality, that is straight sex. Um, in this view, innocence is initiation, and initiation is innocence. So what they're saying there is that um, your children shouldn't believe that something is normal. That's it. And whatever it
Mm-hmm.
takes to break them out of that, that's what they plan on doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then just to finish up here, queer pedagogy um, is to force kids into the closet where they develop their queer consciousness and transcend. I was listening to somebody the other day who said it's not people who believe in God that are dangerous. It's people that believe they are God.
Mm. Mm.
If we
Absolutely.
if you think that you have a right to take over other people's children and force ideas into their heads that have made them miserable, have made many of them commit suicide, have made them unable to cope in the quote unquote normal world, um, you're pathological, I think.
Sure.
I mean, I could say cruel, I could say evil, but those words oftentimes get diminished. But I think that
It's pathological.
there's
It's,
something wrong.
yeah, yes, yes. We as a society are experiencing mental health disorders as a result of all of this. As a
Yeah,
society, that's where we are. We've got a lot of pathology within our own communities, adults included in that.
yeah. And it says some parents are demanding their day in court, and that the inclusive, safe, and welcoming education their children are receiving is, does it say queer or does it say grooming?
Queer,
Okay,
I think
is
it's
queer.
queer.
When the day arrives, they are met with experts of the queer psychologist. Go ahead and continue reading, please.
Cult psychologist who is all too thrilled to tell them that their innocent child isn't so innocent after all. If you scratch a child, they might say you will find a queer.
They believe every single child. You need to remember this. This is not about being nice.
No.
I I don't know very many people I know in real life who would say that I'm a mean person. There are some, but most of them are caught up in this.
Yes.
Um, but I this isn't about being nice. It's not about being welcome. I don't have kids in my classroom who are not welcome. And I don't know that much about them. I've only been teaching them for a month, but I don't know that much about them. All I know is that they're children and they deserve a right to be taught how to think, not what to think,
Mm-hmm.
and that their parents have rights to raise their children the way they want to raise their children.
Mm-hmm.
It really is that simple. And this is colonizing our kids, but it's not just colonizing them because there are some arguments that some things about colonization are not terrible. I don't think there's any valid argument that what's going on here is not terrible. This is this is some scary stuff. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just gonna look really quickly and see if we have any comments or not. Oh, hang on. Okay, we just have a couple of likes. Yeah. So
Good.
I think that covers the whole thing. Do you have anything else you want to say about it?
I know. I think it's a lot for people to kind of sit with and think about. And definitely, you need to advocate for your child, whatever that means. The school's not going to help you. The school has a different agenda in mind if the school's practicing these queer theory type educational standards. They're not going to help you. You're going to have to advocate for the child and consider some other ways, be it homeschooling in pods, be it, reteaching your children when they come home from school what to listen to and what not to, things of that nature, doing a little bit of educating them yourself, even if it's not a whole class. But you have to be very involved in the schools because the schools right now are acting as the parents. They are usurping the parents and their role. So
Yeah,
please be aware of that and think about that. These kids are going to be the next generation of adults that are going to be making decisions politically and otherwise on how we live and move forward as a country. This affects every single person, even if you don't have children, because what these kids and the damage that's being done, what they do in the future is going to determine where our country is going to continue to go or not go. It's
right.
just that simple. That's why I spoke at school board meetings when I don't even have children. I spoke at those meetings because everybody needs to be aware that that's what's coming for us.
Yeah, yeah. And the hope is always, as I said in the beginning, the hope is that you will listen to these and or go and read his book or many other books, but I think that his is one of the strongest ones out there.
Yes, yes.
And so that's Logan
It's
Lansing, The
it's
Queering of the
easy to
American
follow.
Child. Right,
Yeah.
right. And and take it in small doses because this is heavy, heavy stuff. I'm gonna go and lay down in my bed and just go, oh, why?
Oh,
You know,
yes.
because
Oh,
it
yes.
is really hard stuff. But it's also important that you know because you don't want to be blindsided. I've met people who have been blindsided by it, and it's cruel to everyone. It needs to not happen. So, anyways, thank you so much, Christine. I appreciate it, and I will
Ah,
see
my
you next
pleasure.
time.
All right,
Okay.
sounds great. Okay,
All
take
right.
care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.